So of course I'm going to have to put some black paint on the dinghy, otherwise it won't match the boat. I already have black bright side polyurethane, the same paint as I put on the top sides. And then below the taped waterline there, I'm applying Petit unepoxy, which is a hard anti-fouling paint. I find that unless you religiously pull the dinghy up out of the water every single night, you're going to get marine growth. And so the easiest way to get around that is to put anti-fouling paint on the bottom of the dinghy. So I got the manual out because I don't know what I'm talking about. And what I want to do here is to splice on the new painter to the dinghy so as to make a more permanent attachment than just tying a bowl in. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a backsplice, and but we're going to put this crown knot through the ring, which is on the bow of the dinghy. And the reason I have the manual, which is Brian Toss's book, The Complete Rigger's Apprentice, out, is getting that initial crown knot is, I find, very tricky. And usually I have to do it a couple of times, even though I've done it several times and I have the diagram right in front of me. It's just something that, for some reason, I can just never remember how to do. So I've just unlaid about a foot of the line there, and this is 3-strand rope, and I wrapped plastic tape on the end of each of the strands so they don't unravel. Now I also have a little piece of twine tied to prevent the line from coming unlaid any further. And so right now I'm going to try to tie that crown knot. And so I'm looking at the diagram, tying the knot, looking at the diagram, tying the knot. And as I said, this confuses me every time, but it looks like we got it. I just put my fid in there, so we're going to try the first tuck, and you'll know whether or not you have it once you do the first tuck. If you don't have it tied correctly, the first tuck won't be even at all. And but we got it, and now we're continuing on with our tucks. And generally, you want to put at least 5 full tucks here with synthetic rope. So now I've done 5 full tucks, and I'm going to put a taper in. So what I'm going to do is take each of those 3 strands, and I'm going to cut away some of the strands, basically half of the strands to each of the 3 strands. So now the 3 strands are half as big in diameter, and then I'm going to tuck those 3 thinner strands, so the splice will nicely taper off into the line. And just get that last tuck in there, and we have ourselves a splice. I'm just going to cut the strands off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cigarette lighter. This is nylon rope, so I'm going to use a cigarette lighter to burn the frayed ends of each of those strands that are sticking out of the rope, and that'll help to prevent them from possibly working loose. This cigarette lighter is ancient, so it's having a little trouble getting it to work here. Oh, there, I got it. Alright. So we'll just burn the ends of those 3 tapered strands sticking out and make it a little more permanent. We are not done yet. We still have to whip the other end of the painter. This is especially important with 3-strand line, because if you just tape the end, the tape will come off and then the rope's just going to unravel on you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our whipping twine and pass it through the eye of a sewing needle, and then we're going to put the needle back and forth through the rope about where we're going to put our whip, just to anchor the end of the twine. And then we're going to take turns with the whipping twine around the rope in the reverse direction of the lay of the line, until we have enough turns so that the length of the turns is about equal to the diameter of the rope. And then to finish it off, what you're going to do is dive the needle into each of the scores of the rope, as you see here. And we're going to do that until we reach our starting point and tie a knot, and then dive the needle a few times through the rope to anchor it further, and then the job is done. And I've never had one of those sailmaker's whips come undone on me. And again, Brian Toss's book, The Complete Rigger's Apprentice, explains all of this very well, and I highly recommend it as a reference source. Down to the final touches here, I'm going to put the name on the dinghy. That not only makes it look classy, but it's also a good anti-theft measure. I'm going to use vinyl letters, and the letters are set on a backing sheet. And so what you want to do here is you want to tape the letters with the backing sheet onto where you want it on the boat. And then, as you can see, I'm putting a piece of tape across the top there. So that's going to act like a hinge. So what I can do then is I can lift the decal up. I'm going to do it right now. And that's while I have it lifted up, I'll carefully remove the backing sheet. And that'll expose the letters and the adhesive on the letters, so that when I swing it back down, it'll swing against the stern of the dinghy. So I'm taking the backing sheet off right now, doing that carefully, and then there's another sheet which is still holding the letters in place on the other side, and but that's very thin, so you got to be careful that doesn't. It's a bit delicate of a process when you swing the thing down, because if you're not careful, you can get folds in that very thin sheet that's keeping the letters in place on the top of the letters. So now just pressing everything down, pressing the letters against the stern. And I remember that this was an old decal. I've had it for a couple of years, so I was having trouble. The letters were still sticking to the paper and not to the dinghy, so I recall having some problems with that. With newer decals, I do not have that problem at all. And there we are. Looks quite nice. And so the dinghy bears the boat name, preceded by T/T, which stands for Tender 2. So that's Tender 2 Yacht Ruth Avery. So we're going to have to replace the leather on the sculling oar. The old leather was dried and cracked, and it developed a tear in it. So it was time for a replacement. So I'm using a razor knife to cut out a square of leather for us. And I always carry spare leather on board. It's a very useful material to have. In fact, I just ordered another half a hide of Latigo leather. So now we're just checking for fit. So we're going to sew the leather to the oar, but the leather is quite thick and it's difficult to get a sewing needle through it, or a sail needle through it. So I'm going to pre-drill the holes in the leather. That's what I'm doing right now, and I'm drilling them every ½ inch. As you can see, I have a tape measure there, and I'm just following that. And that'll make things much easier, and will also make the result look much nicer, because the holes will be nice and lined up. The stitches will be nice and lined up and evenly spaced. So now we're ready to start stitching, and I'm just measuring the length of twine I will need, which is about twice the length of the oar. It always uses a lot more twine than you think. And we're going to use the double needle baseball diamond stitch, which again is described in Brian Toss's book. And so then we got to thread, cut the twine and then thread 2 needles onto it. And so we thread 2 needles, and the needles are going to cross back and forth in a crisscrossing pattern. So it forms a stitch that looks like the stitch you see on a baseball. And right now I'm just counting the holes because you want to start in the center of the leather. So you're going to start in the center and work to one edge and secure that, and then go back to the center and work outward toward the other edge. So I just have to find the center, the 2 center holes there. Always a little tricky at first because you have a lot of thread, so got to be careful things don't get tangled. And you can see each needle is the thread is looped through the eye of the needle, so the needle is dragging double strands of thread or twine with it. It's actually sail whipping thread. And so there we're going to cross it, and I'm just going to put my finger on it to hold or put my foot on it to hold the leather in place. And we're going to stitch one side, and then take the other needle, stitch the other, pull them tight, cross them over, and so on until we get to the end. Then when we get to the very edge, we're going to double stitch the edge, so that then the last stitch we're pushing the needle in from the outside to the inside, which is a little tricky. And then we'll pull that tight, and then I tie several overhand knots, and then cut the thread, and that'll finish the end off. So I'm just trying to get that last stitch through there, because you're going in from the outside, so if you're not careful, the needle will bury right into the oar. So it's a little tricky. And we just pull it tight. And then I'm going to tie. I usually do 3 overhand knots on top of each other there before I cut off the excess twine. So now we're back at the center again, and we have to tie two ends of the thread together, and so we end up with double threads. And same thing, crisscrossing back and forth. And we get all the way to the end. Tie several overhand knots. And we'll get our scissors out and trim it. And we have ourselves a nice leather.